Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing week 45 of my 2019 reads. This week I finished quite a few very short things. The first book that I finished was Text from Jane Eyre by Mallory Ortberg. This I listened to on audiobook and it's quite short. It's only two and a half hours long, and it was actually a re-listen. Last year, Sush and I had listened to it and we thought it was very funny, and then we were just in the mood. And so we ended up re-listening to it the other weekend and thought it was just very funny. This basically is a satire of many different works of classical literature and what it would be like if the characters in those books were texting each other, and it's really hilarious. I think that even if you don't know the books that some of these are based on, it's still very funny to listen to. And if you know the books that they're based on, what's even funnier is how accurate some of it is. Some of the conversations between people are just absolutely ridiculous, and if you don't know the book, you think it can't really be like that. But since last year, Sush and I have picked up some of the books that we didn't know, and yeah, they're really like that. So this is a ton of fun if you like literature, if you like sort of ridiculous satirical takes on things. I wouldn't say that every satirical take on each piece of literature was perfect, but overall it was really funny. I especially loved the Wuthering Heights one. That's so ridiculous. And just so many different interpretations of classics that I love. So it's a lot of fun, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So next I read 2 picture books by Shaun Tan. The first was The Arrival. This is truly a picture book in that there are no words, it's only pictures, but the artwork is very gorgeous and the story is actually fairly complex. So the story centers on this man whose family lives in a very difficult city, and he decides to immigrate to a different place where there were more opportunities. And it's about kind of his trials and tribulations as he tries to find work, as he tries to adapt to the new city and wants to bring his family over. So what's really interesting about this is it's a little bit of a steampunk type feel world, except that it's purely fantastical. There's all sorts of monsters and magical things, and even the fruits and vegetables are completely out of this world. It's very beautiful and almost surreal artwork, and it really has a lot of emotional depth in the story that it tells of immigration. So this is, I think, a well-known picture book for how good it is. I'm thoroughly on board. I think it's excellent, and I think anybody would love reading it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The other picture book that I picked up by Shaun Tan was Cicada. Cicada is a much shorter book. It is very simple in its story. It has really kind of dreary but crisp art, and it tells the story of a cicada who works in an office with humans. So it lives in a human world, and the humans treat it really poorly, and it just kind of has to get through its daily life like this. The story, I think, is rather impactful in terms of telling what it's like for somebody to be out of place, and also looking at the way that we value people and how we treat those who are different from us. But the story was a little short for me, and so it definitely didn't feel like it fully went everywhere I wanted it to go. It just kind of ended a little bit quickly for me, even though I do think the message was good and I did like the artwork. So overall, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read a Regency romance novella called Someone to Remember by Mary Balogh. This is the 7th book in the Westcott series, and if you're not familiar with romance novel series, basically the author creates kind of, not a world because they're historical, but a group of people and then marries them off one by one. What's interesting about this little novella is that she took one of the side characters that I think in the beginning was meant to be more of a caricature rather than a real person, and decided that she wanted to write a story about this person. So the main character in this is Matilda, who is a spinster aunt. So she's 55 and she never got married, and her whole life revolves around just taking care of her mother, although her mother is this kind of dowager who's kind of crotchety and powerful and doesn't really want to be fussed over. So her character is, in a sense, this unwanted older spinster who has no purpose in life, is fussy and difficult. And Mary Balogh decided to write a little novella about her getting a second chance at love. So the story itself is super sweet. The idea is that when she was young, she had fallen in love, but the person that she fell in love with was very ineligible, and her family said no, and she just never got married after that. Years and years later, they reconnect and they fall in love again. And so the storyline is very sweet. It's a very emotionally fulfilling and comforting read, and I definitely enjoyed reading it. However, I was a little disappointed. I was looking forward to this novella being about a character that usually you don't see in romance novels, this fussy, difficult older woman. And what ended up happening was, through falling back in love with this man, she sort of regained her joy and regained her love of life and her playfulness and sort of reverted to a younger self. And I think I would have enjoyed it more if she had stayed fussy and difficult and a little bit, you know, spinsterish. I don't necessarily love seeing women reformed, so that part I could have dealt with being played out differently. However, it was just a very sweet story, so overall I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I finished was Our Bloody Pearl by D.N. Bryn. This is a book that I heard about from Adriana at Perpetual Pages, who I will link below. I was really intrigued by their description of this book. It is, I believe, a self-published debut where the story is sort of a steampunk world focusing on a non-binary siren, so kind of like a mermaid, who is captured by a very unethical pirate, abused, tortured, and ends up disabled, where they can't move their tail. But another airship pirate is able to free them, and they start developing a relationship. Adriana described this as a very soft romance, and that drew me to this book. Also, Adriana said that there was good representation of Pearl, the main character, the siren, being non-binary. There's also a great representation of same-sex relationships, of asexuality, of many different things, and the disability, I think, was done very, very well, especially the adaptation to a new disability. How frustrating it is to have your abilities change, and how much of the time it's not that somebody with a disability wants themselves to somehow adapt to the world, it's that they sort of want the world to adapt to them. And I really liked that aspect of it. And I liked the coming to terms with the new reality and not comparing it to the previous one. There were a lot of excellent things in this book that focused on that. And the romance really was very respectful. There was a lot of focus on consent and on sort of power over oneself. So those were excellent. There were also some really good themes in this book. There were themes of the perpetuation of violence, of how abuse to one person can lead to more abuse, and also about what forgiveness can play, what kind of role it can play, and how it should or should not be granted. So this book had some really excellent, deeper themes, excellent representation. However, I should have known going in that I would have a problem with this book. The title is literally Our Bloody Pearl. If anybody's been watching my channel for a while, you may know I don't like violence in my books. This book was so graphically violent. Basically, the entire book is one traumatic experience after another, with abuse, with fighting, with blood, with gore, with just constant hurting of people throughout the whole book. And that was so hard for me to get through. Even though I loved the characterization, I loved the representation, I loved the romance, I almost DNF'd this book because the violence was really getting to me. So I struggled to rate this book because I actually think it has a lot to offer, but you need to be able to handle that kind of trauma and abuse being just throughout the whole book, and just the very graphic nature of the violence as well. It was hard for me, but I still really got a lot out of the book. So this book was hard for me, but overall I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And I think that if you're not bothered by violence, this could be a really, really great book for you. Okay, so that wraps up week 45 for me. I have been meaning to wrap up my Disability Awareness Month, but there's actually still books that I'm reading related to that I just really want to finish. So I will get to it when I get to it. It's not going to be immediate. And I also have been a little distracted. I guess you can tell by what I've been reading this month. So instead of focusing on the books that I want to prioritize this month, which are Native American and Indigenous authors, I've been reading all sorts of other things. So I might also have my priority month focusing on Indigenous authors continue a bit into December as well, just as my reading is slightly hodgepodge all over the place. So we'll see what next week brings. If anybody has read any of the books that I've mentioned, please let me know in the comments what you think. Also, just let me know what you've been reading and if you've read anything that has really stuck with you, or anything that, like for me, is a little bit of a challenge to know how to rate, such as Our Bloody Pearl, where you really loved some aspects of it, but other aspects were a big challenge for you.